Thank you everyone for coming out tonight to this event, for braving the cold and the snow later. Appreciate you being here tonight. My name is Kat Long. I'm the Director of Events for Tattered Cover. We're excited to have this conversation today. Before we get started, if you got a book or hopefully with your gift cards, we have our event calendar in there. Lots of great stuff happening all the time here at our different 4 locations, where we've already announced March, what's going on in March, and hopefully soon what's going on in April. So always full calendars. We appreciate you guys being here. If you take any photos tonight or filming, remember to tag us at Tattered Cover Bookstore or Tattered Cover Bookstore. Follow us on social media and our email list. So, all right. So getting started today, we have Don Hall, founder of Evolutionary Change and author of the Regeneration Handbook, which we have a couple copies here today. He has served in a variety of capacities throughout the international transition towns movement over the past 16 years and currently serves as a training coordinator for the International Transition Network. So welcome today, welcome. And Adam Brock is a Denver-based permaculture designer. Did I say that right?
Yeah, okay. You got it.
Food justice fighter, and was named one of Colorado's top thinkers by the Denver Post. Who hopefully your son probably already knows that.
I don't know if I've told him yet.
Yeah, there you go. And this is your first outing since Sunday morning. So welcome to the world, post-child. Author of Change Here Now, also practices what he preaches through his nonprofit, the Grow House. So let's welcome both of these authors for this important conversation.
Great. Yeah, thank you to Kat and Tattered Cover. Thank you all for coming. I've known Adam for, we were just talking beforehand, about 15, 16 years now. I think we first met when I was working for Transition Colorado back in about 2008, 2009. That was the first official outpost of the International Transition Towns movement here in North America. Some of you might know the movement started around 2005, 2006 in the UK and has since spread to over 1,000 communities in 50 countries worldwide. And so Adam was working with Transition Denver, one of the core group leaders, connected there, quickly found out that we're both NYU alumni, which I think made a sort of connection. And I was just, amazed from the start at all that Adam was doing, teaching permaculture design courses and starting the Grow House with some other colleagues here in Denver, pretty much just right out of college. You were only a few years out. And I've followed Adam's work ever since. Tried to hire him away to Transition US when I was executive director there. Failed in that, but have stayed in touch over the years, and really just wanted to be able to have this kind of a conversation in such a kind of potent and uncertain moment here in this country about, how can we really move forward with solutions-based activism here in Denver and around the world when it seems like everything is falling apart. But I want to start, as Kat mentioned, Adam is a new father, actually just got off paternity leave 3 days ago. So welcome back to the world. And how is it being a new father, and how does being a new father, maybe this is a cliche, but change your perspective on this work that you do in regeneration and permaculture and building more resilient communities?
Yeah. Well, I'll get to that in a minute, but first, I just want to appreciate Tattered Cover for hosting us, appreciate you all for coming, and appreciate you, Don, for your consistent, persistent optimism, and I think of you like water, always finding ways to return to source, the source of regeneration and transition, and the path you've walked in this world since long before coming up with this book has just always been inspiring to me. So I'm glad we get to be in conversation tonight. Yeah, I picked such a weird time to bring a kid into the world, didn't I? And it's strange because, you know, I would imagine that this feels like a totally life-changing time for all of us. But also being a first-time parent is an inherently life-changing time, and it's hard for me to separate those two things out. You know, it's like, I'm guessing when I look back years from now, like these two things, like these global social changes and me becoming a father are just always going to be inextricably tied together, for better or worse. But I think specifically the parent part of it is making me really it's making me think differently about what it means to make a difference. You know, I think we tend to valorize the difference makers that sit on stages and have public conversations more so than the difference makers that sing their kids to sleep. But in so many ways that can be just as powerful, just as potent. You know, the way we shape the life of a young human, the opportunities we give to them, the love we share with them, the way we can prepare them for an uncertain world, is every bit as important as the words we write or the things we get paid to do. So that's one thing, and it just makes me even more dedicated to doing whatever I can to make sure that he grows up in a future where he can thrive, and hopefully a future where all of his kin can thrive, all of the people his age can thrive.
Yeah, well, we definitely need to be bringing up the regenerative activists of the future, those people who can embody the new paradigm. So I do think parenting is an absolutely crucial form of transformation, societal transformation.
Yeah, I'm really, he's 3 months old, so he can't understand English or anything like that, of course, yet. But as he continues to mature and become someone who I can be in dialogue with, I am so excited to take the worldview that has been shaped by folks like you and all the people in my community, and that I get to share with other people through classes, and to think about what that means as a dad, as a parent, and how to raise a child with that worldview, which is probably pretty different than what he might get from school or TikTok or whatever the thing is in 10 years.
Totally. Yeah. Well, watch out, world.
I am definitely curious for you how these last few months have been. Something that I definitely have embodied and really believe from my work studying ecosystems is that moments of great upheaval are obviously moments where a lot of possibilities are foreclosed, but they're also moments when a lot of things become possible that weren't possible previously in that ecological regime, right? I think of a forest fire that opens up light for all kinds of new plants who couldn't get light in the previous growth to come up and create a whole different system. Or a flood where that river bringing all the sediment with it restores fertility to the soil. So I guess I'm curious if you feel amidst all the things that feel like they're crashing down around us, if you're seeing possibilities now that were not possible 6 months ago.
Yeah, well, I think I think they're just starting to emerge right now. And I think this has been a big wake-up call for a lot of people. I wish I could say that I'm surprised about what's been happening over the first month of the Trump administration. I'm personally not, but I do hear a lot of people saying, I didn't realize it was going to be this bad. And, you know, they've got a 1,000-page playbook that they're just starting to go through. And I think this, you know, along with the relentless climate disasters that we've seen over the past few years, the flooding in Western North Carolina, the wildfires in LA, I think people are starting to recognize that we are not going back to some kind of, you know, what we thought of as normal maybe 10, 20 years ago. That we're actually headed towards more fundamental and long-lasting changes. I mean, I think what we see is that the paradigm of the industrial growth system, the dominant paradigm in our world right now, is starting to break apart in all sorts of different ways. And I think everybody senses that on some level. You know, whether they can articulate why that is or not. You know, whether they have learned to blame it on immigrants or whether they see it as just a reality of exponential growth hitting the limits of a finite planet. I think it's really crucial that, you know, people understand what's happening in this time. And I'm hoping that people will start to get more curious about that instead of just unquestionably adopting the explanations that are given to them by the mainstream media. Because the mainstream media is not talking about this bigger picture. It's almost completely absent, as they don't talk about this kind of regenerative work that's happening under the surface. So I think that there's a possibility for a lot of interest in trying to understand our current global polycrisis, in alternatives to the status quo. And I think that that's a trend that will only continue to increase. I think that we need to be ready to, as leaders in this movement, as some of you are as well, that we need to prepare ourselves to potentially receive a huge wave of interest and curiosity about alternative solutions that maybe we've never even seen before. And so I think this is really important time to lay that groundwork. I don't think that we're there yet. I don't think we're right on the verge of a tipping point. But I think that as we continue to see the breakdown of all of these systems that we depend upon, that more and more people will start seeking solutions. And there needs to be something there for them to get involved with. Something that they can actually do, you know, no matter where they are, who they are, or we could miss that opportunity.
Yeah, it makes me think how, I think part of how we got to where we are in this moment socially, politically, is that, as you said, so many people in our country, in our world right now, like, know in their bones that things are not working. And there happened to be a convenient ecosystem set up that was telling them a story about why they weren't working and what they could do about it. It just so happens that that ecosystem was not actually acting in good faith or in their best interests, right? Or at least I believe, and you probably believe, right? But it's true that, like, when we as individuals, as a society, find ourselves knowing that things are rapidly shifting, if there's not the infrastructure there for movement building, people will go where there is an infrastructure, whether that's a healthy one or not. We both have books. Ostensibly, we're here to talk about them. I'm curious. You know, you've talked a lot just now about like this tipping point of people starting to be curious about alternative structures and all this regenerative work that's not happening. How does your book address that? You know, not that you were necessarily exactly predicting the moment that we're in now when you wrote it, but it sounds like you had some intimation that something somewhat similar to this might be coming. So how did you, and how do you kind of offer folks practical tools for moving forward in moments like this in the book?
Well, something I spent a lot of time working on with the book was trying to make things as simple as possible. Because, you know, thinking about how to change the world is extremely complex, mind-bogglingly complex to think about all the different variables at play in our society today, all the different directions that we could go with our concern for the world and our desire to be part of the solution. And so many different skills that I think are involved with this work. You know, we don't have a lot of money on our side that we can, you know, hire very large teams where everybody is a specialist in their area. So a lot of times, you know, with grassroots efforts, whether that's growing local food systems, strengthening local economies, moving away from our dependence on fossil fuels, that we have to wear a lot of different hats. We have to figure out ways to engage our communities in a really broad way, beyond just the people who already think like us. So how do we do that? We have to think about ways to, with sometimes very little resources, create impactful, practical projects that really start to shift whole systems. And there's been people developing these alternatives since time immemorial. If we go back to look at indigenous cultures, which I think is a great source of learning, or looking at nature herself, which is a tremendous source of learning, but also just in terms of, you know, social movements here in the U.S. And we have a lot of great examples to pull from, you know, whether those be, you know, small things like repair cafes or gleaning projects, you know, up to bigger things like community land trusts and community-led redevelopment, community-owned renewable energy companies, regional food distribution networks, things like that. So trying to select kind of what I think is the best, most promising solutions that are out there and make it really easy for people to understand. and to also understand all the kind of more unseen aspects of this kind of organizing, whether they be, the importance of really understanding where we are at in this current moment and how we got here, to have some kind of holistic vision for the future where the different pieces actually fit together, could be a viable alternative to the status quo, doing our own personal work, our inner transition work, to be the best leaders that we can be, to be the best agents of change that we can be, and also working collaboratively in groups, which is something that, a lot of us were not brought up to do, I think maybe in kindergarten, but then we got past all that and we learned how to conform to hierarchical systems, and lost those capacities that I think are some of the most critical for creating a regenerative future. If we can't work together, if we can't get along, how are we ever going to build alternatives on system scale? So trying to put forth the best kind of advice, hard-won lessons from experience, and tools, practices, resources in all those different areas.
Yeah. While you were talking, I got this vision or this metaphor of this work that you're describing as being like a gardener of community. In the way that when you're in a gardener in your backyard or a community garden, you're like picking out what seeds to plant and deciding when to nurture them and how to arrange them. And what I hear you talking about is it's like each of these different projects, you're like thinking about what is the exact right project for this community at this time that's going to bring it to more wholeness, and like the water that you're watering it with is like these technologies of group collaboration or local currencies, or like that's the fertilizer that will help it flourish. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that, when you're writing a book, you don't necessarily know what the reader's context is going to be. So I make sure to say at the beginning of the book that these are general suggestions, general recommendations from my experience, but I always love working with individual groups and get a chance to do that a lot through my work with Transition Network, but also through this road show that I did this summer to promote the book. Because then you can really get into the kind of nitty-gritty of what are the challenges that specific group is running into, what is their broader context, what is the ecosystem of all these different groups that are working on similar things, and can kind of tailor the solutions better to those individual communities.
So knowing that every community is different, every context is different, I would love to hear some examples of that, whether it's from the roadshow, like a specific project that maybe was struggling with something and you used some of the tools from your book or your experience to help them get it unstuck, or just even some of your own work. I know that one of the many talents you have is as that kind of convener, organizer, initiator, that you've done both here in the Front Range and Florida. So what are some specific examples so that folks can really get a sense of what this looks like on the ground?
In the book I talk about these 5 stages of transition. This was something that was first proposed by Rob Hopkins, the founder of the Transition Towns movement, in one of his books, and I find it to be the most helpful model for community organizing that I've come across, and one that really tracks with my own experience of doing this work, that it's not some kind of theory that Rob came up with and tried to kind of superimpose on the chaos of the movement, and people trying all sorts of different approaches, but actually looking at what organically happens when somebody starts this process in a community. And, it typically starts with, forming an initiating group, some group of people that want to do this work together, that are committed, that are, have the time and the capacity for it, and start doing educational events, awareness raising events to just, try to build some kind of common understanding around the issues that we're facing at this point in history, as well as some of the most promising solutions that are already out there. And also just bringing together the early adopters, the people who already care about these things, have some knowledge about it, and are ready to get to work. They were just waiting for something like this to come along and get involved with. And I think that a lot of groups get stuck there. At that kind of level of things, or maybe starting a few small projects, a community garden, a repair cafe, doing perma-blitzes, all, kind of small manageable projects that make a lot of sense to do at the beginning, but then they kind of max out their capacity.
Because we're probably all volunteers, right?
Most of the time, all volunteers, and start to think, well, that's all that there is. But there, in this process, there's 4 stages beyond that. There's the deepening stage where we really focus in on creating some kind of measurable impact that really actually makes people's lives better and improves overall quality of life in the community. Something, kind of a flagship project that we can say, okay, here we can really make a difference. We prove that our ideas can work in reality. And then based on that, we start to build a kind of track record, a reputation, that this isn't just a bunch of people sitting around talking about what might happen, but they actually have the ability to make it happen.
So what's an example of one of those flagship projects that you've been a part of or seen in other transition communities?
Well, for Transition Sarasota, the local initiative that I started in Florida and ran from 2010 to 2016, that was our Suncoast Gleaning Project. We started out with just one farm, a farm that I had worked at before, and I knew that there was a lot of produce going to waste. There were always things that didn't make it to market. The farmer would plant out, whole sections of collard greens, kale, lettuces and herbs and all sorts of root vegetables too. But, particularly with collard greens and kale, you pick them and then they come back. They're some of my favorite plants, also super nutritious. And those would just get tilled under to replant at some point. So there was still a lot left there to harvest, and we bring teams of volunteers together, harvest that produce, sometimes a few thousand pounds within a couple of hours. One of the best things, as you know, we can do is to turn a waste source into something of benefit.
Yep.
That's where we get the highest kind of return on our investment of time and energy. And donate that to local food banks and the food insecure in our community. And, just kind of a small project to start, but then, it grew to more and more farms, deeply influenced our local farmers, local food banks, and the emergency food system that wasn't doing a lot with fresh produce before then. It was, a lot of shelf-stable stuff, canned goods. And they actually thought that, people who rely on emergency food assistance wouldn't be interested in, lettuce and kale and collard greens and fresh vegetables. That turned out totally not to be true. And they spent millions of dollars investing into local produce sourcing and the infrastructure needed to distribute that faster. And then it became a model that was used by the Florida Department of Agriculture for pilot projects throughout the state of Florida. So I think it's a good example of how, just a small project can ripple out and scale up over time. But it was something that was, very clearly seen as a good thing by just about everybody in the community. And it really kind of broke things open for us, because after that, we had a lot of, got a lot of media coverage. We started getting a lot of more funding. We started engaging in higher level partnerships, even some groups that wouldn't give us the time of day when we were first starting out. But now that we had shown that we could do that,
You kind of had the credibility.
we had the credibility, and so that opened up new possibilities as well. So kind of trying to help groups get past those very early stages, that kind of stuck point where you don't have a lot of resources and capacity and you just kind of keep going around doing the same thing, how to kind of break out of that cycle and start to scale up and create a new kind of virtuous cycle of more impact, more support, more recognition, more capacity.
Cool. That's such a great example, and I really, all the ways you described how it just kind of grew and impacted more and more people really brings that way of organizing to life. And I've been lucky enough in my work to have been present for and helped out with a few different of those kind of what I like to call spirals of abundance. And it's so amazing because it feels like you are just like riding this wave, and it's the wave of life. That's what I feel like. It's like, this work of transition or social permaculture, whatever you want to call it, at its core, I think it's about tapping into how living systems work and working in that way. And you're letting the way life works do the heavy lifting for you. And in our kind of industrialized mechanical world, we're surrounded by these massive attempts at making the world better that have all these unintended negative consequences. Like so many of the biggest problems of the 21st century are the result of the negative side effects of the 20th century's solutions. But when you're doing this kind of like regenerative organizing, it's the opposite. You start having all of these unintended positive side effects. Like you probably, I mean, maybe not, but I imagine you weren't, when you started this gleaning project, weren't like, and this will be a model for the Florida Department of Agriculture, right? Like maybe in your wildest dreams, but that wasn't part of the plan. But it's just like, because it just had so much momentum and it was so obviously the right thing to do, it just, you get this kind of snowball effect, and it's just such an incredible thing to be a part of and to work with. And so what I'm understanding is that your book kind of breaks down how to do that, or like how to start thinking in a way that allows you to organize the way nature organizes.
Yeah, I mean that's the big frame for it, and I call it evolutionary change as kind of contrasted with the kind of organizing that most of us are familiar with, protest, direct action, policy work, which is all still very important. I don't want to put that down, and we're going to need a lot of it over the next few years. But it does work on a very different paradigm, which is kind of the paradigm of force, the paradigm of the machine, where, this kind of regenerative activism is based on an entirely different paradigm, and I think is at least equally important and receives a lot less attention in our world, where we kind of look for the spectacular,
the shiny
and,
object,
the outrageous. This is a little bit quieter, but I think it could be more effective. And I'm wondering, what are some examples that really inspire you, things that you've been involved with, or things that you know about either here locally or around the world?
Yeah, totally. Well, I want to answer that in a minute, but just when you were talking about the fact that this work is quieter, it doesn't get as much attention, I love to use the metaphor of mycelia. I'm sure a lot of you all know that mycelia are the underground parts of fungi that are present for the entire life cycle of the fungi, whereas a mushroom, which is what we associate with fungi, is only there for a very small part of it. But for the vast majority of time that a fungus is alive, it's underground. It's not roots, because they're all actually like interconnected, and they're just very slowly growing and connecting with each other, connecting with other plants, and shuttling nutrients back and forth in this like intelligence that we're only beginning to understand. And then only when the conditions are right, when it's just the right amount of humidity or temperature, they send up these fruiting bodies, and all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, there's all this fungi here that I never knew about. And I think of the work that you're talking about, that you do, that I do, as that mycelial weaving under the soil that doesn't get that much attention. It's not flashy. And then all of a sudden, like you're talking about, maybe that time is coming sooner than we think. Everyone's
the conditions are right.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Just pop.
Yeah. So in any case, examples that I've been inspired by. I mean, I guess I can share a little bit about the grow house, which I actually no longer work at. The bio in my book is pretty outdated at this point, but that was a nonprofit that I started around the time we met. There's this kind of abandoned half-acre greenhouse just due north of here on 47th and York that we had the opportunity to transform into a hub for food production, food distribution, and food education in solidarity with the residents of that neighborhood right around there, Elyria Swansea. And so over a period of several years, we worked really closely with residents in that neighborhood to earn their trust and help understand what they most needed, rather than coming in and assuming, that, oh, well, this is a food desert, and therefore we need to bring healthy food into the neighborhood. We really tried, in many cases, spent years listening and deeply understanding the specific ecosystem of that neighborhood, and all of that hard listening paid off, because when we finally did come up with solutions, the community felt invested in them, and they were the solutions that the community actually needed, which was not like healthy food right in the neighborhood, because they have cars and they could drive to the Walmart and buy healthy food, but they didn't have time to cook it. And in a lot of cases, they didn't have the knowledge, because they're third generation growing up in this neighborhood with their moms working 3 jobs, and nobody has time to cook food, so nobody learns how to cook anymore, even though they knew that was what was healthier. And so it really became a project about economic empowerment, about helping them start cooperatives, helping start living wage jobs, and also about distributing food in innovative and healthy ways. And so now, I haven't been at the grow house for many years now, but it's bigger than ever, and especially since the pandemic, has doubled down in the food distribution part and is distributing just like tens of thousands of boxes of food to people in that neighborhood and all throughout North Denver every single week. And they've partnered with all kinds of local food producers and distributors and gotten big state grants, and are just moving literally like millions of pounds of food and getting healthy food to thousands and thousands of families that otherwise wouldn't have had it. And you know, I don't know if this resonates for you, Dawn, but I find that this kind of regenerative, ecological way of organizing, it's kind of this exponential thing where it starts a lot slower than a lot of kind of like mechanical paradigm work. So it seems at first like nothing is happening, but then that exponential curve starts picking up steam, and then all of a sudden it's like a lot is happening. And it was definitely that way with the grow house.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I think those kind of projects, those kinds of places are so crucial, you know, not only for the direct impacts that they create, which obviously very important, but also that they become these kind of little beacons of hope in the community, kind of signs of life, you know, and our kind of homogenized, corporatized culture, and that, yeah, we need to kind of, you know, send up these flares to let people know that, you know, this kind of change is still possible, even when things feel so big and so complex that it's like, what can I possibly do? Well, you know, tap into whatever your passion is, whatever really drives you, and see how you can kind of turn it towards the good and can be one of those beacons of hope in the world and help other people not to feel so overwhelmed that change is so impossible, and that we have to kind of just delegate change to the experts and the people in power and the people with all the money. Because if we do that, you know, they have their plans, and they're getting very busy with it. They have created, as you were talking about before, this infrastructure that we don't have right now, but we desperately kind of need to build up, I think, or we're going to see, you know, I think one of the big reasons that the Democrats lost in November was because they were seen as defenders of the status quo. And people right now don't really like the status quo. It doesn't seem to be going particularly well. But we don't really have an alternative vision that can kind of galvanize people, you know, that gives a clear explanation for where we are and where we're going. And yeah, so I think that aspect of kind of, you know, keeping hope burning, keeping that fire lit, is just so crucial in these times. And I'm wondering, for you, like, what does that for you? What keeps you, you know, going through all the challenges that you face in this work? Going up, you know, against some of the most powerful trends and institutions in all of human history.
Yeah. Well, I think you mentioned I'm just coming back to work after family leave, and in the work I do these days, I have the incredible honor of supporting food systems organizations all across the country. And one of them right now is this group that's working with food systems leaders and supporting those leaders and bringing those leaders together. And I was on a call with that group today, at the end of the day, and it was my last call of the day, and I was like, not really expecting much of it. I hadn't met these folks yet. But I got on this Zoom call, and these are like leaders, like in the real sense of the term. Like within minutes I could tell that they just had so much wisdom and gravitas and had been through so much and were facing this moment with so much courage. And I could see very much what kept them going, which has certainly also kept me going, is a connection to their ancestors. You know, I think it's easy to forget that, you know, the time of abundance that our society has been in has lasted roughly 75 years since the end of World War II, right? And for many of us, not all of us, certainly, like, that's just been normal that whole time. But for most of history before that, and again, for many people even since then, and even in our own lifetimes, life has not been easy. Life has been very hard. Life has included dictatorships. Life has included famine, depression, like economic depression, whatever. And yet, whatever our ancestors went through, all those things and more, they did what they had to do so that we could be here. And I know in my own history, my own family history, and my kind of deeper ancestral lineage as a Jew, that there are so many examples of people in my lineage who have gone through times like this and have been resourced by their ancestors and by their vision of being an ancestor, of continuing this chain of humanity, of thriving, of doing the right thing even when you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, because you're just trusting that life needs to continue and will continue. And by tapping into my, and you know, especially now as a parent, very literally, I am another link in that chain. And by tapping into that knowledge and perspective and zooming out of just like this news cycle and this outrage moment, it helps me kind of take a deep breath and settle my mind and settle my spirit and help me remember the long path that we're all on, and that we can get through this.
Yeah. And it's amazing to think about, you know, the challenges that our ancestors have overcome throughout history to get us to this place. And you know, sometimes we might curse them for short-sightedness, but they were doing the best that they could. And yeah, I mean, look at all they created. If we can harness that power of the human spirit, you know, at this moment, and seeing that we can't continue on this path, you know, what beauty, what magic could we create going forward? And I think this thought that, well, you know, it just doesn't matter. You know, it's too late. You know, we're just, you know, one planet in a vast universe. So, you know, I'll just kick back and, you know, enjoy life as much as I possibly can, and just forget about the bigger picture, forget about the earth, forget about, yeah, all the people around the world that are, you know, currently being impacted by the environmental crisis, often much more than ourselves. It's, you know, when you have that kind of deep time perspective and think about all that it took to get here, not just human beings, but billions of years of coevolution, You know, it's impossible to think that what's happening now is no big deal. You know, the first words in my book are, we live in extraordinary times. And it almost seems kind of unbelievable that we would be alive at this very kind of critical juncture in human history, but we are. And I think it's time that more of us started acting like it.
Maybe that's a good place to close our conversation and open it up for some reflections and questions from you all.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So yeah, if you have any questions around any of this,
you had mentioned something about measurable impact that improves people's lives. Like, what kind of things are you imagining to measure?
yeah, I think it's all sorts of things. I mean, I don't, you know, just looking at carbon is not enough. It's a very important metric at this time, but it's not the only metric. So, I mean, it can be, you know, tons of carbon sequestered in living soils through regenerative farming practices, but it could also be, community land trusts and co-ops that, you know, keep neighborhoods from being gentrified and pushing out people who have been there for generations. It can be, bringing people together across long held divides in our society. It can be, you know, shifting money out of, you know, corporate, multinational chain businesses, the oil industry, weapons manufacturing, and so forth, shifting it into local businesses that we believe in, that, you know, make our communities unique and vibrant places, keep well circulating locally, and to invest what we have locally in growing those businesses and social enterprises. So I think there's lots of, there's, you know, probably you could sit down and think of hundreds of different ways to measure impacts, and I think that's, you know, an area in which some work has been done, but a lot more work could be done in developing what are sometimes called like resilience indicators for our local community, and to track those instead of, you know, just the GDP. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that.
I think the only thing I'll add is just an insight from ecology and systems theory, which is that, you know, if you think of any complex system as a bunch of like nodes and links, right, where each node is like a species or a person in a community, right? It's not the number of nodes that make the system resilient. It's the number of links and the number of links that are beneficial. So, you know, that's hard to measure directly, but even if we're just keeping an eye on that indirectly, or thinking about that in the back of our minds as we're setting up these systems, it's like, how can I create the conditions to maximize the amount of relationships created through what I'm doing? That tends to result in these spirals of abundance more than how can I maximize this thing that I can quantify in a spreadsheet.
Right. And I think there are people who are kind of pioneering innovative ways to measure those intangibles, you know, from like the genuine progress indicator to gross national happiness in Bhutan, many others on smaller scales. And I think that's totally essential that we don't just get caught in this frame of, the only things that count can be counted. Life is a lot more than that, obviously.
Hey, I've wrestled with this problems with time. We are in such a deep ecological crisis right now, and my work is in fighting climate change, but we're so deep. And when I want to make more impact and thinking about permaculture ways in business, these are very slow. And they're best done if they're slow. It seems like to start an abundance spiral, it takes a slow start and it has to do a lot of mycelium. But it feels like we don't have time for that. So how do you struggle with that or wrestle with that in your own work of what to prioritize, like doing as much as we can to fight climate change right now, because we have 7 years left before things get irreversible or something? Or like, let's take a couple years to really listen to what the community wants. How do you balance those in your own heads and hearts and organizations?
Yeah. If I can answer this
Yeah,
one first,
yeah,
Dawn.
please.
One of the best, first of all, I think that's a great example of these paradoxes that seem to just be sprouting up like weeds in the times that we live in. I was thinking about this before we started talking, that just like, I feel like more and more I find myself really preoccupied with these conundrums where like these two things that appear to be totally contradictory are both true at the same time. And this is one of them, right? And the way I always kind of cheekily put it is we don't have time to be hasty. And for me, the way I resolve that particular paradox, it basically comes down to faith. That like, yes, there is the science that tells us we have X many years, and yes, we can see these like ever worsening disasters happening more and more frequently. And there is a really deep part of me that no amount of science can inform that actually believes that everything that is happening with climate change, even everything that's happening politically right now, is life working itself out. And that if I can just listen as closely as I can to what direction life is going in and how I can be a part of that, not even influence it. Like sometimes I think the idea that we can even change things is part of the problem, paradoxically, right? So it's not about like changing things as much as just like allowing myself to be swept up in the current of life rather than the current of consumerism or whatever you want to label it. That just by doing that alone is actually the best thing that I could do. Even if it feels insignificant in a tangible or quantifiable way. It's that mycelial link. I'm just making one more mycelial link in that mat that people don't see, that you can't tell is making a big difference until it reaches a critical mass, and it actually does. I mean, a less kind of metaphysical way to put it is that this work that you're talking about, that we do, that Don talks about in his book, is kind of preparing the infrastructure, the social infrastructure, for a time when the current default infrastructure we have is no longer meeting our basic needs. And so like, even if it feels like this stuff is dinky, and like isn't like, like I'm just this tiny little herb and there's these vast trees in the forest, and how could I ever compete with them? Like, well, you can until there's a forest fire, and then you're the only one standing. and then you're the food for the birds.
Yeah, very well said. Just to add to that, I mean, it's definitely a central paradox in my life, and I think that, you know, with paradoxes in general, I think it is helpful to, you know, not try to find too easy of a solution to it, to sit with the question, with the creative tension of it.
Yeah.
In addition to, having a great deal of faith, and I think, you know, faith in that we can, you know, one person can't possibly do it all, and we really need to depend on, you know, millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people taking billions of small actions that are going to come together to be enough. And sometimes I use this image of a giant tangled ball of string. And sure, you know, we might be inclined to just grab a hold of, you know, whatever little bit of string is sticking out, and try to pull as hard as we possibly can on that one bit. But oftentimes I think, you know, doing that, we end up breaking the string and just pulling the whole thing tighter together. So, you know, how you untangle a tangled ball of string is you pull a little bit here, you pull a little bit there, you pull a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, and then suddenly it starts to kind of open up. And, you know, you start to see how these things are connected more clearly, and they get kind of looser. And then my hope anyway is at some point this whole thing falls apart. And we can take that string and use it to, you know, do something good with it.
Weave a sweater.
Yeah, maybe so. But I think that perspective that, just, focusing on where life is calling you next. You know, what is the next step? What is the next evolution? I think is a really helpful question for me personally, to not get caught up in kind of how to figure the whole thing out, but always be kind of, you know, stepping up my game all the time.
We have time for one more?
Okay.
Are there networks in place to connect people doing their little parts? That's my question.
Yeah.
There's lots of different networks. I would say, partial networks. Like there's the Transition Network. That, as I mentioned, it's like 1,000 different transition initiatives around the world. There's, other, networks on every scale that you can tap into depending on, what your interest is. I think one of the most exciting networks that I'm aware of in the U.S. is the New Economy Coalition, which is hundreds of different organizations around the country that are working on building solidarity economies. And, there's the Global Eco Village Network, and, there's networks of permaculture groups and so forth. There have also been efforts to try to establish some kind of network that spans all these different individual movements that are kind of working on different pieces of the same whole. Probably the most successful was Wiser Earth, which was created by Paul Hawken. And I think it grew to, I want to say like over 100,000 groups worldwide that were working on social and environmental justice. But, you know, it depends what you mean by a network. When it gets to that scale, you know, really are these groups part of the same network, or are they just listed on a website together? You know, this whole thing is so vast, and that's what Paul Hawkins said. It's the biggest movement in the history of the world, but it doesn't have a name to it. So it's not that easily identifiable. And it's really hard for anybody, you know, even, you know, working on this stuff full time for almost 20 years now. I don't have my arms around the whole thing. And so in a way, I think it's almost kind of like a fool's errand, like a Tower of Babel kind of situation to try to weave all of this together. But again, you know, paradoxes. I think that we do need to connect the dots somewhat to show that all these things, you know, all the solidarity economy efforts, all the regenerative food systems efforts, all the permaculture efforts, the transition efforts, the intentional communities, and so forth, that this is all part of the same movement, even if, you know, we can't catalog the whole thing in one place, and to kind of try to draw out that there is this big thing happening. I'm calling it the regenerative communities movement. Different people have different names for it, doesn't really matter. But I think there needs to be something identifiable that can be shared with people. I think right now it's really hard to kind of identify how these things are connected if you aren't a part of them. And to break through into the media, we need that kind of scale into the mainstream media to get this in front of people, get people talking about this, because it's so crucial, and so many people are unaware that this thing even exists at this point.
I got an email from one of my former students from like 10 years ago or something who emailed me out of the blue that he's starting this initiative to create a pin, like a physical pin that you wear to identify yourself as like someone who is part of this movement. And that was one of the more creative ideas I thought I'd heard of in a while.
Is it the black elephant pin?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool too.
Yeah.
So it's like the elephant in the room combined with the idea of black swan,
Yeah.
like this unexpected thing showing up.
Yeah. So maybe that'll catch on. Maybe that'll be the thing. Who knows?
We're part of it anyway.
Yeah. Well, I want to give folks, I want to respect y'all's time and give you some time to mingle and chat with us a little bit more informally. So if it's cool with you, maybe we can close the official conversation now. And yeah, thank you, Don, for bringing us all together tonight, for all the work you do in the world. And thank you all for joining us and being part of it. And we'll be around to sign books or do whatever else if you want to chat.
I was